Topic number 5, how they ended it and how I'd fix it. This topic probably has the most editing that I have for it and I feel like everyone else kind of agrees with me with the critiquing the end. For my rewrite, I started at fragments because that was whenever I thought the biggest changes were necessary. The only thing that I'd change, really, is Jasper being revived, because it kind of got rid of the danger of death in that world. This is, of course, more focused on storytelling than mental illnesses, so just take a break from the mental illness part for a while. If shattered gems can be healed, there's almost no risks at all. She doesn't even do anything for the story after that, so if they revived her, they should have at least addressed her and Lapis. Either kill her and make it purposely unsatisfying because she doesn't get to resolve her issues of Lapis, or revive her and give her a redemption arc. Not just revive and then not do anything with her. Luckily, because of the rewrite, I get to change some things. Yay! Homeworld Bound is probably the episode where I changed things the most. First of all, why was Spinel and the Diamonds totally fine together? They were a recipe for disaster. Spinel reminds them of Pink, which she hates. They have to have some sort of conversation about it. She has to have questioned if they really love her or not, and then get worried about them leaving her. Spinel has horrible separation anxiety, and the Diamonds' way of punishment is to leave people in a tower for days on end, all alone. There was no possible way they could have gotten along. I'm sorry. More stuff for the rewrite to address. Anyways, so I am not going to repeat myself about how Steven tried to kill White. This is an exaggeration again. Not showing that murder is every traumatized person's go-to, but instead that PTSD may cause you to act irrationally towards events or people who remind you of the trauma. The main critique that I have for the next episode, Everything's Fine, is the effort the Crystal Gems are putting into helping Steven. I think that they could definitely get away with this for this far, because Steven's been the therapist for them his whole life, and if he says he's fine, he must be fine, right? Because he's always known better before. But in Everything's Fine, whenever they just go, oh, okay, after Steven says that he's fine whenever he's clearly not, that is kind of unrealistic of them. It's very unrealistic of them. There was no way they'd think that glowing pink Chad Steven running around and accidentally destroying things is normal. Their trust in his judgment would end there. If they really wanted to spend this episode with Steven running around and messing more things up to really drive home the idea in his head that he's a screw-up and can't do anything right, they should have at least shown the gems chasing after him and trying to stop him and calm him down. This would have actually been very fun, and very easy to do storytelling-wise, especially since Steven is a diamond and probably impossible to restrain by only 4 gems. So it would be very easy, in a writer's perspective, not only to show that the gems are trying to help him, but also showing them fail in a realistic way, because, yeah, he's a diamond, there's no way they'd be able to stop him if he really wanted to do something. So just have this same episode, but instead the gems are trying to get him to talk about what's happening, and then he just refuses. And, oh boy, I Am My Monster was not terrible, but not good either. Before I go on, I just want to mention that people keep on complaining about, what, how did Steven get corrupted? There's nothing wrong with his gem. I quote directly from Garnet that corruption is not a tear in the body, but a tear in the mind. She literally says that in one of the first episodes. Even though the main cause for corruption was the Diamond's attack on Earth, that doesn't mean that a gem can't go insane by other means. And for the 100th time, the going insane and corrupting thing is another cartoonish exaggeration. It's not saying that everyone with PTSD or bipolar disorder or whatever he has will turn into a monster or will become insane. It's saying that you will become a monster-like person if you suppress it and try to ignore it and pretend like it's fine. It's just showing you what not to do and how avoiding treatment is bad. In fact, now that I think about it, the whole of Future is pretty much Steven being a bad example, and then the Crewniverse telling you not to do what he did, and then the audience getting mad because Steven was a bad example instead of handling things in a perfect, angelic way like how they expect him to, somehow. Anyway, back to the critique of the last episode. Or, actually, no, it was second to last, not last. It was obviously rushed, but that's nobody's fault. The Crewniverse fought for every second of that episode, and truly could not possibly give us any more time than they did. But the way that they spent that time was a little unsatisfying. Everything so far has had a good flow to it. One bad thing leads to another, Steven is trying to fix it, it falls apart, he gets even more upset about it falling apart, the various things that are warring inside of his head mess up things more, etc. But the conclusion about how they fix all of that is a hug. It was going so well until the hug. This is my biggest problem with Future, and I'm sure it is yours too. Hugs don't fix everything. All that strain and trauma and issues aren't going to be solved by a hug. The literal only explanation that I have for this is that things weren't solved whenever he was hugged, and instead the crying was less of an everything's better now, it's all chill, and more of a alright, you guys were right, I do need help. Still, if we were going for that explanation, I still would have liked for them to express that a little bit more, because it was kind of vague and definitely led people the wrong direction. And on top of that, I would have liked to see one of the biggest things that we missed out on, the actual healing process. After sacrificing Steven as a bad example of what not to do whenever you have problems, they probably should have given a good example after that. Instead of skipping forward to when everything is moderately okay, they could have shown him going to therapy, taking medication, struggling and sometimes failing to get better, trying to make amends for what he did, succeeding, among other things that go on whenever someone actually tries to get better. It doesn't just become happy times in 2 seconds. Getting better is a hard, long process. Sometimes it feels like you'll be stuck like that forever. Sometimes it feels like everything has been dragged back down to where you began. Sometimes you feel like quitting. But eventually it will get better, and I really, really wish that they showed Steven undoing all the damage that had been done to him all throughout Future. Even though it's implied that all of that happened through the time skip, we really missed out on being shown the healing process and seeing how things will get better and that there's still hope. That way, people who are going through that stuff in real life won't expect themselves to change at the drop of a hat. If they see Steven get better through a hug and a time skip, they'll think that'll work, and then whenever it doesn't, they'll think that there really is no hope for them and probably end up worse than before. And as for the last episode, I wouldn't change much other than Steven having a real plan. I thought about how Steven's future would play out, and the best thing that I thought for him was to, ironically, become a therapist. I know, it came full circle. But it actually made a lot of sense to me. Most therapists actually ended up having problems of their own and wanted to work towards helping other people too. He loves helping people. He already had a lot of practice for whenever he was a kid, and now, whenever he's fixing himself in the aftermath of his childhood, he probably is the best equipped person on planet Earth to be a therapist. He could help the uncorrupted gems who are still messed up from the blast. He could help Eyeball or any other gems that were surviving in the war and to get rid of their PTSD. He could help normal humans who were just like him. I just feel like that it would be more conclusive than he'll figure it out eventually. Steven's big problem was not knowing where he was going in life, and sealing it up with study to become a therapist to help people is probably going to sit better with him than just, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, since he had such a big problem with that solution before. Alright, geez, that script took forever to write. It's already 10 pages long. Sorry about the length of this video, I'm just very passionate about this show and I can't stand people hating it for reasons that they shouldn't be bothered by. You shouldn't be forced to hate something that you love just because of a bunch of angry people. In conclusion, Steven Universe Future was not perfect, but it was not as terrible as people keep on making it out to be. The season was meant to be an epilogue, not a 6th season. Even though it was a cartoon doesn't mean it can't deal with heavy stuff. Steven Universe is probably the best example of this. The mental illness representation could have been more specific, but they did well with the cartoonist exaggeration to give you a bad example of what not to do whenever and saying that suppression is bad and that you need to get help if you have problems instead of hoping that it goes away. Steven was out of character on purpose, that was a whole problem. He and the characters were aware about how strange he was acting. Stop getting so mad about that. That's how trauma works. It changes people for the worse if you don't get help. And finally, they shouldn't have saved him with a hug and should have showed the healing process so it's a little bit more hopeful for people in real life who has mental illnesses. Everyone happy? Good. You can stop hating a show that you love now. Just remember, if every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs. And I guess Future is the hot dog. That sounded so silly. Bye guys, love you. Bye.